Historically, the major contemplative traditions, Vipassana, Zen, and Vajrayana, provided structured instruction sets, but developing in isolation, their methods often seemed profoundly contradictory. These traditions grew in cultural silos, leaving practitioners with few tools to integrate their wildly different approaches to sensory experience. Shinzen Young emerged as an anomaly in this landscape, crossing sectarian boundaries to identify a single underlying mechanism of practice. His origins were deeply esoteric. He received formal ordination and completed rigorous basic training as a Shingon monk on Japan's Mount Koya. Eventually, his career path shifted toward the secular, transitioning from monastic mysticism to his current role as a neuroscience research consultant. This background produced his primary innovation, unified mindfulness. It is a precise taxonomy that translates diverse Eastern paradigms into a secular, algorithmic framework. This framework provides a universal schematic to map three specific contemplative vectors: analytical, dynamic, and formless, on a single verifiable scale. The first two vectors in this synthesis represent a total structural inversion: Burmese Vipassana and Japanese Rinzai Zen. The Burmese Vipassana vector focuses on a microanalytical deconstruction of the sensorium. Practitioners use noting to label specific sensory events as they arise. This progression moves from observing to doing. The practitioner first analyzes their senses to realize impermanence internally. Only later do they express this fluidity in their external actions. Japanese Rinzai Zen operates in an entirely different environment, one that is intense, rigidly structured, and focused on monastic ritual. The mechanics of the Rinzai path rely on surrendering to the rigid rhythm of the monastery's schedule to find a natural flow with impermanence. In this system, the progression is exactly backward. Monks move from doing the ritual action first to later observing that this same fluidity is the nature of their own minds. Our model now shows vector B moving in the opposite direction, where ritual action serves as the entry point for sensory observation. Despite these inverted phenomenological directions, both methodologies are engineered to drive the practitioner toward the same profound realization of impermanence. The architect of this dynamic Rinzai Zen methodology in the West was Kyozan Joshu Sasaki Roshi. Sasaki Roshi taught that the fundamental nature of reality is a ceaseless, dynamic activity characterized by a perpetual going and coming. In this model, all human experience arises from two opposing forces: effortless expansion and contraction, polarizing from a primordial zero. Roshi's specific pedagogy aimed to bypass the conceptual intellect entirely, forcing students to somaticize these forces rather than thinking about them. This was the purpose of the prolonged Do-O-O chant. It served as a direct, non-conceptual expression of pure presence. During formal interviews, Roshi would generate a sharp, sudden sound by slamming a teacup onto a table. He would then demand to know where that sound and where God had gone. Passing this koan required the student to physically experience the absolute vanishing of the sound and their own ego into the void, or shunyata. He even mandated a morning laughing exercise, requiring students to stand and laugh heartily upon waking, to establish a light-hearted, non-clinging baseline for the day. Sasaki Roshi translated abstract, non-dual metaphysics into visceral shocks to the nervous system. Away from these active rituals lies a third category of contemplative technology: formless methodologies. Formless practices target the deepest layer of the ego, the subtle sense of doership or personal volition. We can analyze these techniques by plotting them on the matrix based on required vigilance and prerequisites. Soto Zen's shikantasa, or just sitting, occupies the high vigilance quadrant. It is often described as a warrior stance, where allowing the mind to wander is treated as a failure in a sword duel. Tibetan Dzogchen sits in the opposite quadrant. It explicitly requires a master's pointing out instruction to initially recognize Rigpa, or the mind's innate luminous clarity. Once recognized, the practitioner uses small glimpses, many times, to actively refresh that recognition if they become distracted. Tibetan Mahamudra serves as a bridge. It begins with deliberate effort that eventually self-liberates into effortless, non-dual abiding. Shinzen Young's Do-Nothing protocol distills these models into a standalone instruction. Let whatever happens happen, and drop any intention to control your attention. Plotting Do-Nothing shows that it miraculously achieves the relaxed stance of formless Zen without requiring specialized mystical instructions. It is a secular extraction that isolates the mechanical act of dropping volition, making formless practice accessible to anyone. This taxonomy frames these varied traditions as a self-balancing ecosystem of attention training. Our final model shows the interplay between active observation and passive surrender. Without active observation anchoring the mind, passive practice degrades into dull reverie. Conversely, without formless surrender, analytical noting turns into ego-driven striving. Alternating between these active and passive states perfectly balances the practitioner's cognitive load. This balance is the central objective of Shinzen Young's taxonomical project. By translating abstract spirit energy into concrete observable mechanics, he effectively strips the cultural dogma away from cognitive awakening. Merging the precision of Western science with the depth of non-dual realization creates an algorithmic path to fundamentally optimize human happiness.